I was standing on the balcony of my hotel in Santorini, sunlight pouring over the whitewashed terraces, when my phone buzzed. The notification felt trivial against the Aegean's calm, until I saw the subject line: termination notice, effective immediately. Well, at first, I thought it must be a mistake. 7 years at Vencor Dynamics, building expansions, strategizing mergers, managing client portfolios, and HR fired me via email. I reread it, half expecting a "just kidding" line, but the words were real, cold, precise. Organizational restructuring, alignment with new corporate strategy, appreciation for your contributions, polite enough to be deadly. I could almost see Aaron from HR, smug as always, typing each sentence. He'd envied me since the day I presented my first European growth plan. The same man who pretended to mentor me now thought he had the upper hand. And yet, I smiled. Because they'd forgotten one critical detail: I had written my own contract. 2 years ago, after preventing a disastrous merger, I'd negotiated a clause that no one else noticed. All proprietary strategies and analytical models developed by Alina Voss remain her intellectual property, with profit participation rights extending beyond employment. They thought it was standard retention language. It wasn't. It was my insurance, my quiet revenge waiting to unfold. I called my lawyer, Oliver. Calmly. "They've done it."
Legal architecture.
He chuckled.
Precise.
"Then congratulations.
Silent. Permanent.
You just turned your vacation into a multi-million
Legal
dollar leverage
architecture.
point." I set my phone down,
Silent.
poured wine,
Permanent.
and gazed at the sea. They had fired me, yes. But they hadn't removed me. I still controlled the algorithms, the forecasts, the financial models that powered the company's revenue. Every division using my frameworks automatically triggered licensing rights in my favor. The waves crashed softly below, rhythmic, indifferent. My vacation had suddenly become more interesting than any boardroom meeting I had ever attended. I let the absurdity of it settle in. HR, smug and precise, had triggered the clause that would cost them millions, and they didn't even know it yet. I reread the email one last time. Effective immediately. The phrase felt almost poetic. They had believed they could erase me with a single click. But what they didn't realize was that legal architecture, precise, silent, permanent, could do far more than their petty HR tactics ever could. I finished my wine, smiled at the horizon, and whispered, "Let the claws wake up." They thought they'd ended my story. They had only set the stage. 3 days after the termination email, I received a message from Maya, my former assistant. "Finance can't access half the forecasting models. Something's locked." I smiled. That wasn't a glitch. That was Clause 9C activating automatically. When HR processed my termination, the frameworks, developed immediately, reverted to private ownership. Every department using them now owed licensing fees to my holding company, legally, neatly, irrevocably. The CFO sent me an urgent email the next morning, requesting clarification. I didn't respond. Silence is currency, and I intended to let it accumulate interest. Then came a direct message from the CEO. "Elena, can we discuss this situation? It seems there's a misunderstanding." I replied in one line, "No misunderstanding. Clause 9C is self-executing. Review the signature on page 14. I imagined the room back in London. Executives flipping through contracts, heads in hands, trying to understand why the systems they relied upon for every forecast were suddenly non-functional. Operations slowed. Investor reports stalled. Automated predictions returned errors. Profit calculations froze. And yet, I was still on vacation. Glass in hand, waves below. Every movement of theirs now triggered payments to me. Small sums at first, test runs from individual departments. Already, I was earning more in licensing than I had in months of salary. The law was doing what I had spent years planning, turning my brainpower into leverage, quietly and efficiently. By the time I landed back in London, their panic had reached a crescendo. Accounting called internal meetings. HR scrambled to explain. The CEO's office erupted with emergency sessions. Every system connected to my proprietary models halted until legal validation was confirmed. It wasn't revenge yet. It was structure enforcing itself. A quiet, inevitable, perfectly legal consequence unfolding while they scrambled in confusion. I stepped out into the city streets, took a deep breath, and smiled. 3 days into a vacation they thought I'd wasted, the clause was fully awake. And by the end of the week, they would learn that firing the person who wrote the rules never ends well. By the second week, Vencor Dynamics was unraveling faster than anyone could have predicted. The financial department could no longer run projections without my proprietary models. Forecasting algorithms crashed, automated reports failed, and operational planning ground to a halt. It was legal chaos, executed automatically by Clause 9C, the clause HR had overlooked in their arrogance. Every division I had touched was now, in effect, paying me. Licensing fees triggered for even the smallest queries, and the sums escalated with each attempt to access the data. The first week yielded minor payments, just enough for the panic to seem plausible. By week 2, the internal accounting systems had reported errors large enough to trigger the CEO's first real alarm. I watched the reports on my own systems from London. My former colleagues were scrambling, calling each other frantic meetings, attempting patch fixes that had no legal or technical standing. I didn't respond to a single email. Silence had become my weapon, and it was more effective than any confrontation. Every call from HR or management increased the cost of their oversight. Oliver, my lawyer, updated me daily. They've proposed a settlement, $1.2 million to revert usage rights, he said one morning. I laughed softly. The number was generous in the short term, but meaningless in the context of the ongoing revenue stream I now commanded. Tell them my silence is priceless, I said. Meanwhile, Aaron, the HR director, finally called. Alana, this is absurd. We can work this out, he stammered. I replied evenly, I'm not doing anything. The clause is enforcing itself. All you've done is remind me why I wrote it that way. Within days, investor calls were flooded with reports of misaligned projections. The CFO could not produce reliable figures. The media caught wind of internal instability. Though the exact cause was confidential, rumors spread quickly. Vencor's stock dipped noticeably. Every hour they wasted without legal acknowledgement of Clause 9C amplified my leverage. By the end of the second week, the CEO had resigned quietly, citing personal reasons. HR leadership was in turmoil. Internal communication channels were clogged with panicked clarifications. They had fired me, thinking they'd simplified operations, and instead had created a legal and operational storm entirely of their own making. I remained calm, collecting payments automatically, monitoring the situation from a quiet apartment in London. No threats, no confrontation, only precise leverage executed according to the terms of a single contractual clause. Every day their mistakes cost them more money, more control, and more reputation while I continued to watch, silent and untouchable. By the time week 3 concluded, it was clear. They had not just lost a strategist. They had lost control over their entire operation. And I had become the invisible hand guiding the outcome. It was the most elegant form of revenge, legal, quiet, and completely unavoidable. The panic inside Vencor Dynamics escalated quickly. By week 3, the board had convened emergency sessions to discuss how to regain operational access to my proprietary models. The problem was simply they legally couldn't use them without my consent. Clause 9C had transformed me from a former employee into the company's most critical stakeholder, whether they liked it or not. The first overtures came through Oliver, but 800,000 for temporary access. I declined. The next offer doubled, then tripled. Each communication revealed growing desperation. I didn't need money. I needed acknowledgement of their misjudgment. The quiet control was infinitely more satisfying than any immediate payout. Aaron from HR called again, voice trembling. Alana, this is just a misunderstanding. Can we resolve this internally? I responded simply, Clause 9C is self-executing. Review the documents you signed. I could imagine the flurry of activity behind my words, executives flipping through contracts, lawyers drafting new memos, IT teams attempting to override systems. Every action they took inadvertently increased my leverage. Every delay generated additional revenue via licensing. Finally, the board offered $2.5 million, full settlement, acknowledgement of my intellectual ownership, and formal recognition of my contributions. I accepted. The transfer was smooth, deliberate, and entirely silent on my part. No confrontation, no spectacle, just the quiet execution of my strategy. The irony was delicious. The same man who had typed the termination notice, effective immediately. Email now signed off on a document recognizing my authority and crediting my work publicly. Their arrogance had become the vehicle for my reward. Vencor called it a settlement. I called it validation. Every dollar was earned, legally and ethically. They had underestimated me, thought they could remove me, and in doing so, triggered a sequence that would financially benefit me far beyond my previous salary. I reflected on the situation quietly. Revenge doesn't need confrontation. It needs precision, patience, and a system that enforces consequences automatically. I had done nothing overt. I had simply planned and waited. Every misstep on their part had amplified the outcome. By the time their lawyers had signed off on the settlement, Vencor had learned a costly lesson. Firing the person who wrote the rules never ends well. I hadn't sought revenge through anger. I had leveraged intelligence, contracts, and silence, a combination far more effective than any public showdown. 3 months later, the story went public. Headlines announced, Vencor Dynamics pays 2.5M over contract clause oversight. The company tried to minimize the narrative, framing it as a clerical error. Industry insiders knew better. Everyone who had ever doubted HR or management's attention to detail now reread their contracts with renewed respect. I didn't celebrate publicly. I didn't post on social media. I simply watched from my own office, sipping tea, as the world finally recognized the consequences of their oversight. My own consultancy was thriving quietly, with several new clients impressed by my strategic acumen and ability to leverage contracts effectively. The satisfaction wasn't the money. It was the principle. The company that fired me thought they could erase me. They didn't understand that legal architecture, precise planning, and patience are more powerful than any boardroom authority. I sometimes open the original termination email. Termination notice, effective immediately. The words still bring a wry smile. They intended to end my role. Instead, they funded my freedom and publicly acknowledged my contributions. Power, I realized, doesn't come from titles, offices, or executive meetings. It comes from understanding the system better than anyone else, and ensuring that, when others act recklessly, consequences are automatic. HR thought firing me was the final act. In reality, it was the beginning of a sequel, one I orchestrated silently, legally, and permanently. And somewhere in the servers of Vencor Dynamics, Clause 9C still exists, silent, unseen. A quiet reminder that underestimating the wrong person can cost millions, and that patience and planning are more lethal than anger. The company learned the hard way, never fire the person who writes the rules.